All right. So, how to manage events across locations. So what we're going to talk about here is we're going to give you guys an organizational blueprint to really kind of fight through all the common issues that we see when organizations decide to manage and sell tickets to multiple events. This is going to be a really exciting one. It's a little different from the webinars that we've done in the past, which are more focused on event marketing and more broader subjects. This is pretty specific in terms of the theme, overlying theme here, and we think it's going to be really good. It's going to help you guys out a lot. So what do we want you guys to achieve after this webinar is over? First, we want to make sure that you learn techniques for onboarding new members to your event team. Secondly, we want you to identify your key success metrics for your events. Everyone's going to have specific metrics for their events depending on what type of event they're organizing. So we want to make sure that each one of you guys identifies this clearly. And then finally, we're going to eliminate unnecessary communication and marketing pitfalls. We're going to dive into a bunch of those. So it's going to be a lot of good information here for you guys to run with. Okay. So Ben, how big is this opportunity?
Let me tell you, Jack, it's huge. It's huge, I'm telling you. And really, for you guys, the one thing to take away here, and you can see the numbers that Jack's put on the slide. The real point we're trying to convey in just how big this opportunity is for organizations having events, multiple locations, multiple events, is that we're sort of in an era of an experience era. That word's been thrown around, but people, not just millennials, but really everybody is spending more money on experiences than they are on gadgets and toys and whatever the heck it is people buy. So an experience is way more bang for the buck. It's what more people are doing. And so for you, for your organization, your university, your chapters, whatever the case may be, you're probably going to be finding that events are one of your biggest revenue generators, and it's one of the things that increases loyalty. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why, but there's a lot of opportunity, and there's also a lot of ways to sort of mess it up. But the opportunity is there, and it's a big, big opportunity.
Yeah, big as in billions of dollars. That's how big this event industry is right now. Yeah. But unfortunately, organizing multiple events and generating revenue, Ben, it's no bed of roses.
You know what? The really only unfortunate thing here is that this is a slide, and so. But go ahead. I've never seen this movie, but I do get your.
I highly recommend Ben and the rest of the audience to check this out. It's one of Christian Slater's
his hits.
Greatest hits.
Okay.
Well, he really got robbed here.
I won't see it, but okay.
Regardless of this terrible rom-com reference, the reality is that organizing multiple events is no walk in the park. Organizing one event is tough enough. When you're managing multiple people and these events are happening in different locations, there is a lot that can go wrong. And you want to make sure that you are best prepared to make sure everything goes right.
And this movie recommendation is Jack's alone. I just want to make that clear. All right. So I can snag this one and follow up to that slide. So before we get into solutions, one thing we want to make sure we cover are, of course, the problems you're going to be encountering. And so we've narrowed it down, and we've picked 5, but there's obviously going to be a lot of other problems, and they may be specific to what you're doing. But overall, like I said, from an over 1,000-foot view, those problems are event team turnover, communication breakdowns, inconsistent messaging, no control of your revenue, and then a lack of insight into your metrics. And we'll go over in a little bit more detail what each of these means. And they're not necessarily in any order of importance, but these are sort of the most common things we see when you're managing multiple events across multiple locations.
Definitely.
Oh, so man, I just team turnover. It's the worst, Jack. I don't know what to do about it. What do I do?
Well, it's a hard problem to solve for. Especially for an events team, just because the nature of being in a managerial position of an events team is that people tend to come and go. You don't have typically an event coordinator stay at the same organization for decades and decades. So you have to be prepared when really important members of your team leave and make sure that all the pieces don't fall apart when that happens. So what do you do in that case? What you really should focus on is staying a step ahead and creating a seamless onboarding process for new team members.
This all seems simple, but I just wish there was a playbook. I wish that somebody had some sort of playbook that, I see. Now I see.
There is a playbook. Okay. There is a playbook. That's what we want you guys to do. You want to build a playbook so that anyone that enters in your organization that you want to be responsible for helping out with any of the events that you guys are putting on can understand exactly what they need to do to be successful. In a playbook, typically you want to have a division of roles and responsibilities. The bigger your organization is, the more events you organize, this is even more of importance, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important to mention that this playbook, the worst thing you could do is create this playbook and then never change it. You're going to want to be changing this playbook pretty regularly. What we'll touch on in a second plays into that collaboration and updating of things. But this is something that from a national standpoint, you want to be able to hand out to each one of your chapters, and they can apply it to what they're doing. Does that sound right, Jack?
Yeah, that sounds exactly right. And building off that example, another example would be like if you are a university and you have all these student groups that are operating their events independently under you, you want to be able to give them the playbook that has all the best practices, all the rules that they need to follow, just so everyone's on the same page. And then finally, as you continue learning more about what makes your specific event successful, like Ben said, you want to add that into your playbook on an ongoing basis, just so everyone is up to speed with what is the best way to go about throwing events for your org.
And we don't have time in this webinar to go over some specific examples, but we have them. So if you're interested in learning maybe what organizations that we worked with have done from a handbook standpoint, an organization that we're going to talk about a little later comes to mind, we can share that with you if you reach out to us. But we can show you, if you're wondering, okay, I know I need a playbook, but what does that look like? We can show you some examples. Just feel free to reach out to us at the end of this.
Definitely.
All right, communication blues. No one likes the blues. Well, I kind of like the blues, but not when it comes to communication. No one wants to be sending an email to Debbie over here, and then Mark gets that same email, and you've got 8,000 different threads going. Email by no means is dead. It's still a huge part of your communication, but it's slow, it's tedious, it can bog down an event, particularly if it's the same event happening over multiple locations. Really, the main takeaway and the whole point of this slide and where it's going to lead is that it's a time suck. It's going to turn into a never-ending reply where, another form of communication could have taken 5 minutes. You can end up spending days and even weeks, especially if you're in a big organization.
Yeah, and with managing events across all these locations, time is of the essence. So you don't want to get bogged down, and you don't want to bog down your team members, your employees either, with a long drawn-out thread of emails where people have to go back and find different documents that were in these emails. It's just going to make life a lot tougher when it gets to crunch time, and you got to really start organizing these events and making sure they're successful.
Yeah.
So what's the solution here, Ben?
Well, let me tell you, Jack, there's a lot of solutions, but one that I would recommend, I think one that we recommend as a company is a tool called Slack. We actually use it internally. I won't take too much time, selling the product, but basically the big advantage for Slack, and really what you should be trying to achieve, is to accumulate and aggregate all of your communication into one place. Slack works for us. There's a lot of different tools out there, but why Slack works for us is because it allows us to take conversations, whether it's one person talking to one person talking to a team, or one person talking to an entire group or organization. It allows you to segment your channels and really take communication that could take weeks over emails and turn it into just a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation. This is a perfect tool for working across different locations. So,
yeah.
Jack and I can attest to this, how feasible and how great this is. Slack is a good tool. There's a lot, but it helps us communicate no matter where we are.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different use cases beyond just event planning as well. But this is obviously what we're going to be touching on. So, what this image is a screenshot of a particular conference that's using Slack, so you guys can kind of see and visualize how it would benefit your organization. So as you can see, they've created different rooms based on different, arms within their event. So they have a room for sponsorships, another room for volunteers, just so the right people are in the right conversations, and it just makes communication 10 times easier. In this particular screenshot, it looks like one of the organizers was posting pictures at the event. So this is another great option to see, what does my event design look like, especially if, you're in California, your chapter or your other, sub-organizations in Montana. What is going on? I need updates. Mm-hmm. This is an easy way to do it in real time.
And it's worth mentioning that there's a time and a place for an email. There's a time and a place for a phone conference or some kind of screen sharing. Those are all important. What we're talking about here is more of a constant stream of communication, more of a consistent, basically a conversation, something that is ongoing, maybe even throughout the day. It's kind of impossible to ask somebody to stay on a call for multiple hours. This is something you can have up at all times. It's also on your mobile. That's important. If you're moving around, it can be on your mobile device. So it's just a nice tool, a nice thing to have to stay in touch with people and communicate.
Definitely. Okay, so kind of switching gears here and talking about marketing. We're going to talk about a little bit about a top-down marketing approach. So in the eyes of a sales director, for instance, that's managing all the events across their org, it is very key to maintain that creative control while allowing each individual event to market independently. Super important. On the flip side of it, if you're operating just an individual chapter within your organization, you want to leverage your organization's assets, because it's not a good thing if you just kind of go off the cuff and don't maintain that brand consistency. And so it's super important for both sides here in this puzzle to kind of work together to achieve maximum efficiency for your event.
And one thing, so all of these are tied. This is something that's probably going to be in your playbook. So when you're putting your playbook together and you're establishing, whether you're the national chapter that's writing it or you're your local chapter or your university that's writing it for people within the organization, it should be clear what your brand identity is, and typically the national chapter defines that identity, and then whoever those lower branches find their their niche based, whether it's on location or the type of events that they host, whatever the case may be. But there should definitely be some structure, and then within that structure you can sort of be unique based on where you are and what your events are.
Definitely. Quick little example here. So this is a nonprofit. It's the Birth Network, and this is their national Twitter channel that they're using. And if you can read it, what they're doing is they're kind of promoting their Salt Lake chapter's event. And why this is awesome is because the national channels obviously are going to have more reach, and so you can really kind of stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, to really get all the marketing potential out of your large organization.
And I'll say this before we move to the next slide. This seems like a no-brainer. Of course, the national chapters should promote their local chapters, but you'd be shocked how very rare that is. Local chapters and national chapters, whatever, small to big, the communication's often very disjointed. So I would say, just as a side note, if you are a local chapter or you are a smaller piece of your organization, talk to the bigger organization, talk to the parent, so to speak, and see what they can do to promote. And then likewise, if you are that parent, you have a lot of power and a lot of reach. Help your smaller organizations or your chapters out. It's very simple, but I mean, it very rarely is it done properly.
Yeah, definitely works both ways here. So we want to kind of show you guys an example of an organization who does it right. So if you haven't heard of the Chive, they're a big media property that has a massive following on the internet. And so what they kind of tuned into is that they started seeing all these little unofficial meetups pop up around the country, organized by just fans of the Chive. Kind of just happened organically. They didn't really, control it or anything. But once they started seeing it happen more and more often, they're like, okay, this is obviously awesome. They're raising money for a good cause. They're trying to associate with our brand. Let's create this community arm called Chive Nation. With Chive Nation, individual chapters were established under the Chive across the country. And so what the Chive did to help out these individual chapters is first that they created a website with all the information needed for creating your own chapter, as well as listing all the information regarding different meetups that are happening across the country. So what this does is it acts as a hub for anyone that's interested in Chive and getting more involved in the community to go to this website, access all this information, and understand what is needed to really get started and get everything done. Very easy to do. If you're an individual chapter that's part of a large organization, you guys don't have this, I'm telling you, try to plead with them and get something like this set up. It's not that difficult to do, especially if you have like a web development team. It'll just benefit everyone involved. Additionally, what the Chive did is that they provided a playbook for each chapter.
I see. Now I get it.
That armed them with event planning best practices, along with the Chive's branding assets that they can use in any of the marketing that the individual chapter was doing. This allowed each chapter to operate independently while maintaining that brand consistency with the Chive brand. Quick example here: this is a chapter in Kentucky that actually uses Ticketbud for their event ticketing.
Smart.
And as you can see, they incorporated the Chive logo, but they're still maintaining their own unique identity as well. So it's a win-win for both like the parent organization and each individual location or chapter, so to speak.
Makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me as well. So yeah, kind of segueing here. I know Ben wants to talk about this. This is a big problem for a lot of orgs, is controlling your revenue from your events.
Yeah, and so in working with sales, a lot of times what it comes down to is the revenue and the financials and the dollars. And I think one of the biggest points of disconnect, even bigger than a communication disconnect, is the flow of money. Chapters are obviously making, to use the chapter as example, they're making money off of their events. The national organization has to account for that usually in some way, and it's very disjointed. The local chapter isn't sure how to report it to the national chapter. The national chapter isn't really quite sure how to get the funds from the local chapter. It's chaos, and so the burden falls on both sides, and obviously I'll leave it up to wherever your role in that particular play is to decide. But the idea here is that there needs to be a very streamlined method of communication. So the revenue either needs to go straight to the national office, or the local chapter needs to take it and needs to report it to the local office. Those are the two top ways we see. It's the easiest and it's the best way for both parts to stay informed. What you want to make sure you do is have some sort of revenue reporting in place. And we'll talk about metrics in a second, but the idea here is that there needs to be financials, reports that can be easily passed along either from small to big or big to small, both for marketing purposes, accounting purposes. One of the big benefits, and I'll bring up Ticketbud here because that is who's putting on this webinar. When you have your chapters using an event with Ticketbud, the reporting that we provide is very easily exportable, and it's specific to an event or to a chapter, and that can be easily downloaded and passed along to a national office. So one of the big issues that I've seen is that when money is collected via check, via in person, it's hard to keep track, and then it's hard to collect, and it's hard to put into a proper spreadsheet, and then it's hard to pass along to the national office. So by the time the money gets to its end goal or its end location, it is nowhere near the actual amount of money that was raised, and there's a lot of chaos that can come from that. You can imagine. So cash flow is going to be important. Moving events online is going to be a big advantage in and of itself, but what you do with it from there is probably even more important. So from a controlling revenue standpoint, either the national office, if you're in the national office, you should have a corporate bank account that you can tell each individual chapter or smaller branch to fund the money to, or if you're the smaller branch, you should be able to have a seamless way to have money go from your local account to the national account.
Definitely.
Does that make sense, Jack?
That makes total sense. And one last thing to add, with our Ticketbud for Organizations product, you can actually route all of your individual locations or chapters revenue to one corporate account. So that solves a lot of problems with cash flow and trying to figure out where the money is. Is that's all going to be associated, or not associated, but routed into a bank account, and then the corporate entity can disperse that to the individual chapters when need be.
That makes sense. So building off of controlling your revenue, part of that is knowing what is your definition of success. So that involves establishing success metrics. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into an event. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of ways that you could deem an event a success or a failure. The only way to truly know that across multiple locations and across multiple events is to identify what, in your mind, are the most key metrics that summarize your success. So for some events, that's percentage increase in sales over the previous year. For others, it's how did this chapter do versus another chapter. It's different for everybody. The key thing to take away here is that it has to be the same for every event that you do, because if it's not the same, it's going to be impossible to compare apples and oranges. One of the nice things, if we look at this little screenshot over here and just, again, playing off of Ticketbud's organizations feature, if you are a national, again, chapter that creates a bunch of smaller chapters, you as the administrator, you as the quote-unquote parent organization can look at the success of all events that are or all organizations that are under you. So you see here, you've got names of different events, you've got sold, gross, and payout. You can see everything that your small organizations have done. And of course, if you've decided that revenue earned is a metric of success, which seems like a good one to me, you can quickly go in and see that and see who your most successful chapter is, your most successful events are. But the idea here is uniformity. Your metrics, once you decide on them, have to be the same. And I would say they'll be pretty obvious to you. I know it sounds very ambiguous just based off of what we're talking about, but you know your events. So your definition of success will probably be different than somebody else's, but it just has to be the same.
Definitely. And then I guess one thing to add to that is that, when you have this all set up and like Ben said, what your metrics are, this is going to be able to really influence future decisions regarding different events down the line. So you might see that your chapter in New Orleans is having problems selling tickets, so maybe you should put more of your marketing budget towards one of the other cities that's doing a lot better to see if you can squeeze as much revenue as possible out of that potential event. So insights like that are pretty important going forward.
Right. And again, everything's connected. So to Jack's point, if you have a chapter or you are a chapter that is struggling, use that line of communication, which should be made clear in the playbook. We're bringing everything full circle now. But use your line of communication that's probably set forth in the playbook to talk and figure out why are you not successful? Why is the New Orleans event not doing as well as the one in Raleigh, North Carolina? I mean, these are all tied. Communication is going to be key. But yeah, I mean, you can obviously see how important everything is.
Definitely. Okay, so where to go from here? I know we've covered a lot of common problems and hopefully provide solutions. Regardless if you're an administrator that's focused on just managing all your events teams, or you're someone you're an event coordinator that's operating just a couple of events for your large organization. Regardless of your position, applying these principles is going to make everyone's job 10 times easier.
Yep, at least.
I know a lot of this stuff seems kind of like, okay, duh, I need to do that, but it's pretty surprising how quickly organizations forget things like this, just because there's so much going on. There's so many departments, so many meetings of the minds, and it's very hard to remember these core principles to ensure that your events team is really running on all cylinders.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I can say is that having worked with a fair amount of organizations that or universities or whatever that has sort of a national office and then smaller chapters with events all over. I mean, a lot of them, when we talk, they have a flow chart and they have what seems like an organizational structure. But once you really get into the nitty gritty, they don't have much content that they at the national office can disperse everywhere. They don't really have a simple and seamless revenue, line of revenue of how the money goes from a chapter to the national office. So these are core things that I think get lost in the shuffle a lot of times, and everyone thinks these are very obvious problems. Of course, tell me something I don't know, but I mean, these are screws you have to have tied tight, otherwise things are going to fall apart. So a lot of these are basic, but if you do it right, you're going to have very successful events.
Definitely. And then one last thing, it's a little plug here, but if you'd like to learn more about our Ticketbud for Organizations feature, we provided a link in this PDF. It's going to tell you all about what this feature is and how it's different from our standalone product. It's really helpful for organizations that need that type of insight into all the different events that are operating under them, and just really making them throw better events, essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the end of the presentation, guys. Thanks for attending. Like I said, this presentation will be sent to you, and you'll have access to the slides as well. Appreciate any feedback. Just respond to either me or Ben via email. I'm Jack at Ticketbud. He's Ben at Ticketbud.
Ben at Ticketbud.
Yes, hard to pronounce, I know.
It is a foreign name.
But yeah, we're always excited about doing these webinars. We'll have plenty more coming up. So if you have any interested topics that you'd like us to cover, we're your experts. So let us know. Thanks again, guys.
See ya.